I'm Jennifer, and I'm 48 years old. I married Paul, who was 5 years my junior, when I was 33. He had recently finished his medical internship when we first met at the hospital where I work as a nurse. Paul and I had different responsibilities in our careers and ages, but I was drawn to him because of his innocence and his readiness to ask for assistance. Our regular chats turned into a loving partnership over time. We are different in age, so at first I was worried, but Paul seemed unconcerned about it. After dating for 2 years, we exchanged vows. But after 5 years of marriage, Paul started making disparaging comments and lamenting that he had not wed a younger woman. He openly flirted with hospital staff members, something I ignored until I found out one day that he had an affair with a former patient who was 10 years my junior and already pregnant. His deep, piercing laugh as he explained away his infidelity broke my heart. I agreed to a divorce and requested alimony because I could no longer stand his deception. Paul was naturally outraged by this choice, as he felt he should be compensated for sticking with our marriage. The fact that his father did not care about his son's misconduct made matters worse. Reluctantly, because Paul would not pay, I looked for legal help. Despite hearing nasty comments from him during our marriage and having to confront his adultery, I didn't give up. I got the alimony I was entitled to with the help of the attorney. We broke up and I moved out on my own, ending the lease on our shared apartment. More insults followed Paul's move to a new hospital, and I was troubled by the critical murmurs he left behind. Eventually, the incessant talk began to negatively impact my mental health, which led me to decide to check out of the hospital. I actively sought out a new professional environment after a period of aimless wandering, realizing my affinity for both job and physical activity. Luckily, there was a tiny maternity clinic hiring nurses 2 blocks from where I live now. I was accepted into the team right away after the interview. Even with only a few doctors and nurses working there, the clinic had a welcoming, cozy vibe that made it easy to give patients the best care possible. A pregnant patient who had been referred from another hospital showed up for her appointment on one of the clinic's more peaceful days. Her name was the same as Paul's partner in the affair, so I couldn't help but question whether that was simply a coincidence. Verifying her husband's identity as Paul, a physician, it was evident that she was, in fact, my ex-husband's spouse at the time. Even after that surprising encounter, I was hesitant to tell anybody else about their link. Days went by, and I was still unable to deal with the problem. Then Paul and his spouse visited us one day for a checkup. Paul looked at me with wide eyes, obviously not expecting our paths to cross again. To be honest, I had intended to stay away from these kinds of interactions, especially in this environment. Paul's accusing tone made his wife realize who I was. "What are you doing here?" His words stung, and I found it difficult to explain that I had been working at the clinic for a long time before learning of their proximity. "Wait, did you come here to harass us?" he asked. Paul went on his rant, accusing me of stalking them and causing trouble, but he ignored my argument. He was obviously in the wrong, but his remarks made those around us look at him with disapproval, which made me uneasy. Paul's wife pretended to be upset, suggesting that I was a threat to her and the child out of concern for their safety. At that point, the attending physician entered the room and asked me to leave in order to defuse the situation. Even though I knew it was important to put the patient's health first, the experience made me feel unjustly condemned and unsettled. I was put in a position I didn't want to be in, feeling very wretched about the information about my divorce that I had planned to keep hidden. I became quite conscious of the critical looks I was getting from people. To make matters worse, Paul's wife was still visiting the hospital and publicly criticizing me. Everyone was at a loss for words because, as a patient with a fragile pregnancy, I felt compelled to balance protecting her privacy with not upsetting her, even though everyone knew I wasn't at blame. It seemed inhumane to stay in this setting until her delivery, which was still more than 6 months away. Even though it was a nice place to work, I felt obliged to give the hospital my notice of resignation. The director looked almost relieved. Despite the fact that I had done nothing wrong, I couldn't help but question why I was being treated this way. I was so worn out from everything that I couldn't bring myself to look for another medical job. I then went back to my parents' house. My parents gave me a quiet greeting, I had trouble finding purpose for a long and felt bad about just remaining home and not doing anything. I ultimately made the decision to start working part-time at a local grocery. It felt like a welcome change of pace and my first job outside of a hospital. Even though I enjoyed and found fulfillment in my profession as a nurse, the burden of responsibility in a setting where lives were at risk was enormous. My mental health improved when I moved away from that setting. I tried to get by on my own since I didn't want to bother my parents. I wish I had gone home sooner, looking back. I was still living with my parents when I got an offer to work full-time at the supermarket about 3 years later. They appreciated my efforts, and I was truly delighted to take the job. I had requests for matchmaking over the years, but I gently declined, knowing that at 45, I had no intention of getting married again. When the manager stressed that the prospective partner was similarly divorced to me, I was taken aback. The offer stayed in my thoughts even after I turned it down at first. Given our shared maturity, I consented to the scheduled meeting. We agreed to meet face-to-face without using any middlemen. My matchmaker was waiting for me at the assigned eatery when I got there. He got up as soon as I walked in, knocking his chair over. His face went completely crimson, and even though he was embarrassed, I couldn't stop laughing. It had the feel of a scene from a book. "Hello, I'm Edward. I appreciate you coming today," he added, gathering himself. We said, "Nice to meet you, I'm Jennifer." Maybe because of the first awkward moment, but we soon got along well. I found out that Edward had been into our supermarket on a work trip and had fallen in love with me right away. He had persuaded the department head, who happened to be university student Edward Sr., to set up our encounter. "If it's feasible, I'd like to pursue a serious relationship," Edward said. I was ready to say no, but I couldn't help but find myself yearning to see him once more. We made the decision to be married after 6 months of courting. My folks were truly thrilled for us and enjoyed Edward's personality. Edward's thoughtfulness and concern for us made our lives together genuinely wonderful. We had not originally intended to have children because we were both older, but my health took an unexpected turn when I turned 48. It wasn't that I was sick. I was expecting. Never thought I would be pregnant at this age, and I definitely didn't think morning sickness would be the cause of my suffering. When I broke the news to Edward, I have a feeling he felt the same way. I said, "It looks like I'm pregnant." Edward said, "Well, that's great. Who's pregnant? Do I know the person?" I pointed to myself and said, "Yes, I believe you know her very well. She's right in front of you." Edward stared at my belly, looking perplexed. I clarified, "Ha! I'm the one who's pregnant." He was silent for a minute, taking in the information. "Wait, so you mean we'll be parents?" he inquired, his eyes widening. "Yes, it seems that way," I replied. "Really?" he asked in shock. "Wow," he said, giving me a tight hug. I could hardly believe it. "Unbelievable. It's a miracle," I said quietly. My age was an issue, even though I had never thought about not having the baby. "Is it okay if I go through with it?" I felt nervous thinking about the future. I knew the hazards associated with being an older mother, both for the mother and the child, even at the hospital when they asked, "What will you do?" Not everybody would support our choice. People might ask us when our child is 21 years old. I was also concerned about the uncertainties of parenting at this age. Even so, the idea of destroying a life that had taken root was too much for me to handle. Edward's quick response, "What are you saying?" "Of course, it's natural," made me smile. It seemed to me to convey Edward's true emotions. But eventually, he became concerned about my well-being. I could see the difficulties even for a man like Edward. We had a long conversation about it, and we still wanted the baby. Under the doctor's direction, we started making arrangements. Our parents were truly excited, but they were also taken aback and worried. It was so agreed that I would give birth in a sizable, well-equipped hospital. It was comforting to know that the obstetrician was a very skilled and kind physician. In addition to the obstetrician, an internal medicine physician also visited on one of the prenatal checkup days as an added precaution. Edward was also expected to attend. However, he was unable to do so due to an urgent work assignment. I went inside the examining room by myself. I was shocked to see Paul, my ex-husband, there. It was unbelievable, to be honest, to run into him again in a setting like this. Abel, ha! Seriously, you're a 48-year-old pregnant woman. Impossible to give birth at your age. He laughed out loud. Paul ignored the bewildered looks on the faces of the attending nurse and obstetrician. You have no right to say such things. I'm just concerned, I replied. It's gross, a grandma getting pregnant, he went on. Is that how you treat patients? Even without the anxiety that pregnant women already face, spewing such hurtful words is unbelievable. And you call yourself a doctor? What are you acting all high and mighty for? Besides, this hospital mostly caters to celebrities. Do you even realize that it'd be better for you to leave before embarrassing yourself? Doctor, I'm going to leave without being informed. Having a baby in a hospital run by medical professionals like you? Not at all. Yeah, just go. Doctor, Paul scoffed, gesturing to the door. This woman is the major donor's wife for the Taylor Group, specifically the son's wife. He went on, you might not know her since you're new here. But Mrs. Taylor cut him off before he could say anything more. This can't be true, but we've never met before. However, your recent comments were very inappropriate, Mrs. Taylor remarked. It's unbelievable that a doctor would say such things. My husband, Edward, entered at the same moment Paul became pale. I apologize for being late. My wife was, Edward began, sensing the tension in the room, observing my angry expression, Paul's pale face, and the overall atmosphere. He stopped mid-sentence. What's wrong? This doctor warned me that it's awful to give birth at 48, I said. When I saw Edward's worry, his demeanor immediately altered. Edward's voice was harsh as he said, Paul, you're Paul, right? You insulted my wife. Paul faltered, refuting the charge, but Edward persisted. At that moment, the nurse who had previously departed with Mr. Taylor, the director, returned. How can you insult a patient like that? What kind of hospital is this? I can't trust this hospital with my precious wife and unborn child. I've heard there was some rudeness, director. Edward jumped in, clearly frustrated. I thought this was a reliable hospital because my father recommended it, but I didn't know they had a doctor like this. It seems I chose the wrong hospital. I'm very sorry. No, that's not true. This man is not our doctor, the director stated, to our surprise. The director said again, I just fired him. I just fired him. I didn't know he was such a person. I just let him in because a friend asked me to. We don't need a doctor who spits out such insults. He will never appear in front of Mr. Taylor again. Hey, director, what are you saying? Paul said that the director had silenced him. Paul objected when he heard the director say, Shut up and be quiet. You get out of here right now. Don't ever come near our hospital again. But the obstetrician who was present hauled him out of the hallway. After the director apologized a great deal, we collected ourselves and took our seats again. Edward was still enraged, though. Did you kick him out because my father donated to this hospital? If not, would you let a doctor like him run wild? The director nodded his head. Actually, Paul had only been at this hospital for a week. Paul's father was my classmate, and they had a reunion the other day, and he asked him to hire his son. He had no idea he was such a person, and he looked truly sorry. Not all the doctors at this hospital were like Paul. The obstetrician in charge was a very good doctor. If Paul wasn't there, I would want to give birth here, I replied, and Edward concurred. As the president of a sizable corporation with locations around the nation, Edward's father gave a portion of his earnings to welfare and medical institutions. He gave a large donation because this hospital had treated his mother when she was very sick when she was younger. His father suggested this hospital for my delivery because of this. Paul got in touch with me a few days later, pleading with me to get the director to give him another chance. Perhaps he'll think twice if you ask for him, he begged. His haughty demeanor had frequently caused offense to patients, as he had been bouncing between hospitals. I was astounded that he continued to make the same errors. His father had warned him that he would not have a future if he was dismissed once more. But I couldn't help but wonder if he had become such a man because of his father's indulgence. I was sitting next to Edward when Paul called. He grabbed the phone away from me and started screaming at Paul, saying that if he ever got in touch with me or came close to me again, he would be reported to the police for harassment. He never called back, so he must have been afraid. Paul was working at a convenience shop when I happened to swing by on my way home from the hospital. It seems that no hospital was willing to hire him anymore. He was sobbing uncontrollably and lamenting the departure of his spouse and child. However, I had no compassion for him. All I could do was stay away from that convenience store. I gave birth to a healthy baby girl the following year. She was really cute. I promised that no matter what, I would raise her with love and responsibility. However, Edward fell in love with her right after she was born. I had to use caution because he appeared like a very lovely father.